The moment I saw the bright pink violation notice slapped on my dock post, I knew exactly who was behind it. Unauthorized vessel moored on HOA property. Immediate removal required or fines will be assessed daily. My boat. On my dock. On my land. I stood there in worn jeans and a grease-stained t-shirt, staring at the laminated warning flapping in the breeze like some kind of HOA declaration of war. I didn't even have to look across the water to know she was watching me. Sure enough, there she was, Rebecca Martin, the self-appointed queen of the Lakeside Ridge HOA, standing on her porch with binoculars in one hand and a walkie-talkie in the other like she was the commander of a suburban SWAT team. I'd only been living here for 6 months. Bought the house after retiring early from a 20-year engineering career. I wanted peace and quiet, a little fishing. Maybe fix up the old pontoon boat I found on Craigslist. What I didn't want was to be drafted into Rebecca's war on anything she didn't personally like. As I peeled the notice off my own dock post, I saw her coming. Marching down the gravel path in wedge heels, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like a crown on her head. "Mr. Jackson," she began, her voice already laced with condescension, "I've warned you before that the HOA does not allow private watercraft to be stored on communal shoreline." "It's not communal," I said. "That dock's on my survey." "I checked before I bought the place." She gave a tight, patronizing smile. "I'm afraid you're misinformed. The shoreline is under HOA jurisdiction, Section 7, Paragraph 4, Line 16 of the Community Bylaws." I looked her dead in the eye. "I'm not misinformed. I have the deed and the survey. The dock, the water under it, and 5 feet past the end of it all sit on my property. You're trespassing, Rebecca." Her face twitched, just a little, but I saw it. "You'll be receiving a fine," she said quickly. "That boat will be towed if it's not gone by the end of the week." I leaned on the dock post, calm as a calm man could be. "You tow that boat and I'll press charges for theft." She turned red. Not angry red caught red. "I'm sure we can resolve this civilly," she said, voice cracking ever so slightly. "Great," I replied. "Then start by not touching anything on my land." She spun around and stormed off, muttering something into her walkie-talkie. Probably radioing her second in command, that guy Greg who once fined a neighbor for having a bird feeder too close to a fence. I didn't move the boat. I didn't need to. But what I did do was dig out every zoning map, property survey, and legal document I had. Because something told me Rebecca wasn't done. The next morning, I found a bright orange tag zip tied to the boat's steering wheel. This one wasn't printed, someone had written it with a marker in huge block letters. "Final warning. Removal by authority." No signature, no official seal, just the kind of handwriting you'd expect from someone who talks over people in meetings and thinks laminated name tags make them powerful. I plucked it off and walked straight back up to the house, tossing it into a drawer where I'd started collecting these little trophies. I wasn't angry yet, but I was getting curious. Curious about how far she'd push this, because I'd seen this type before. The kind of person who builds their identity around rules they barely understand, and when you challenge them, they don't back off, they escalate. By noon, a landscaping crew I didn't recognize pulled up in a noisy truck, the kind with dented fenders and mismatched tires. I watched from the kitchen window as they dumped a load of gravel right in front of my driveway entrance. Then they started positioning orange cones around the edge of my lawn like they were setting up for a road crew. I stepped outside, leaned on the porch post and called down, "You boys lost." One of them, a kid maybe 20, looked up nervously. "We got a work order to regrade the shoreline easement. HOA said this lot needed compliance restoration." I took a long breath through my nose. "And who signed that work order?" He pulled a folded sheet from his back pocket. I walked down, took it, and scanned. Sure enough, the requester name was Rebecca Martin, but the address listed was the HOA clubhouse. Not mine. No authorization code, no homeowner approval. "You're gonna want to pack this up. There's no easement here," I said, handing it back. "You touch that shoreline with a shovel, you're trespassing." He didn't argue, just nodded and turned to wave his crew off. They packed up quietly, tossing the cones back into the truck bed, and drove off without another word. I spent the rest of the afternoon at the county registrar's office. There was one document I hadn't yet pulled a recorded plat map with the original developer's annotations. When I got it, I nearly laughed out loud. Not only did it confirm the dock was built entirely within my lot boundaries, it showed that the HOA's jurisdiction line stopped 15 feet short of my seawall. I had it certified and scanned on the spot. Back home, I emailed the document to my lawyer, Saul, an old college buddy who owed me more than a few favors. I asked him to draft a cease and desist letter addressed directly to the HOA board, citing the property boundary violations, the unauthorized work attempt, and the repeated harassment. I told him to add a line about upcoming legal action if they kept it up. That evening, I noticed my mailbox had been tampered with. The latch was broken, and the flag was jammed halfway down. Inside, a soggy copy of the latest HOA newsletter had been crammed in with a heavy envelope marked urgent. I opened it. Inside was a formal violation notice, claiming I was in breach of HOA Code Section 15 for failure to maintain uniform shoreline aesthetics. Attached was a photo apparently taken from a drone of my boat, with a red circle drawn around it in a messy digital edit. There was also an invoice for provisional compliance services totaling over $800. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The next morning, I walked over to the HOA office. It was a squat little building near the tennis courts, the kind of place that looked like it wanted to be a town hall but never got the funding. I stepped inside, where a board receptionist looked up from her crossword. "I need to speak with the board president," I said calmly. She blinked. "Do you have an appointment?" "Nope, but I brought documentation." That word seemed to get her attention. She picked up a phone and murmured something into it. A few minutes later, Rebecca stepped out from a back room, adjusting her necklace like she was prepping for a photo shoot. "Mr. Jackson," she said, a tight smile forming. "If this is about the boat, it's about your abuse of power," I said, handing her a manila envelope. "Certified plat map, county registrar seal, legal boundaries confirmed, dock's mine, shoreline's mine." "You've overstepped." She flipped through the packet, eyes darting. This must be outdated. We have newer." "No, you don't," I cut in. "I checked. There hasn't been a boundary amendment since the subdivision was built. Your office has no jurisdiction over my lot. And hiring a crew to perform unauthorized work, that's criminal trespass." Her posture shifted. She wasn't standing as straight anymore. "I've also got a cease and desist letter drafted by legal counsel. You'll receive it formally tomorrow. If you so much as touch my property again, we'll file for injunctive relief and damages." "Now hold on," she said, hands raised. "There may have been a miscommunication. We were acting in the interest of community standards. Community standards don't override property law," I said. "And they sure don't give you the right to fabricate charges or send unlicensed crews to dig up private land." She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out, just a shallow exhale. I turned and walked out without another word. On the way back, I passed Greg, clipboard in hand, standing near a neighbor's mailbox. He lowered his sunglasses and gave me a long look, then glanced down at a slip of paper and back up again. I didn't stop, but I had a feeling I'd just made the watch list. 2 days later, the HOA sent a reconsideration letter, basically a vaguely worded non-apology that said they were reviewing procedural clarity. I forwarded it to Saul, who laughed and called it the bureaucratic equivalent of a toddler mumbling sorry with a cookie in his mouth. Then came the real kicker. I got a call from the sheriff's department. "Mr. Jackson, we received a complaint from your neighborhood association claiming you threatened a landscaping crew with violence." I blinked. "What? Don't worry," the deputy said. "We investigated. The crew already gave a statement. Said you were polite but firm, didn't threaten anyone. said they were pulled off the job as soon as they realized the work order was illegitimate. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. So the HOA filed a false report. Looks that way, and that's something we can't ignore. They opened a case file. Not against me, against the HOA board. Turns out, filing a knowingly false police report is a misdemeanor in this county, and when it's done by a governing body, that's a whole separate can of worms. The sheriff's office sent a formal inquiry to the board requesting documentation of the complaint, including who filed it and under what authority. Rebecca tried to backpedal, claimed it was misfiled paperwork, but the damage was done. Once the case was opened, the county ethics office got wind of it. Then came the audit. Apparently, the HOA had been dipping into the community fund for beautification projects that never seemed to materialize. Thousands spent on shoreline upgrades, compliance enforcement, and drone surveys, with no receipts, no contractor names, nothing but vague line items on quarterly reports. A group of residents, most of whom I didn't even know, started knocking on doors. They'd had it with the fines for mailbox paint chips, the notices about non-conforming garden gnomes, and the way Rebecca and her inner circle ran the board like a private club. By the end of the week, a petition had circulated calling for a special meeting to vote on board removal. They needed 60 signatures. They got 83. I didn't start the rebellion, but I sure as hell lit the match. The special meeting was set for a Thursday evening in the community clubhouse, a building that usually sat empty save for the occasional Pilates class or bingo night. That night, though, every seat was filled, some folks standing along the back wall, arms crossed and lips pressed tight. I sat near the front, not because I wanted to, but because the residents insisted. They saw what happened and knew who set the chain reaction in motion. Rebecca arrived 10 minutes late, flanked by Greg and a woman named Paula, who rarely spoke but always nodded along like a wind-up toy. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse, trying hard to project composure, but her hand shook as she adjusted the mic stand at the podium. "We're here under Article 9, subsection C, to address the petition for board review," she began, not looking up. "This meeting will follow procedural order and recognize registered speakers only." A voice from the back cut through the room. "We've seen your procedures." "That's why we're here." No one laughed. They didn't need to. The silence said enough. The first speaker was a retired postal worker, Marlene, who lived on the cul-de-sac near the walking trail. She held up a stack of envelopes. "Every month I get these violations. For my shutters, for my porch light, for a recycling bin left out. But when I asked for clarification, I was told the board doesn't interpret the bylaws, they enforce them." "So which is it?" Rebecca shifted in her seat but said nothing. The next speaker, a man in his 30s wearing a maintenance uniform, stepped up. "I offered to mow the park lawn when the vendor didn't show up last fall. Did it for free. Next day, I got a letter warning me not to engage in unauthorized landscaping. That's how you treat volunteers." Again, nothing from the board. Then Saul entered. He wasn't on the speaker list, but he didn't need to be. He walked straight to the front, placed a thick folder on the lectern, and looked out over the crowd. "My name is Saul Levin. I'm a licensed attorney in this state, and I represent Mr. Jackson, among others who have come forward this week. What I'm holding is a summary of financial discrepancies traced to the HOA's discretionary spending accounts over the past 5 years. Unaccounted expenses, reimbursements without receipts, contracts listed under companies that don't exist." He opened the folder and began reading names. Silverwave Shoreline Services. Claimed payment of $12,000 for erosion control. No business license, no contractor ID. Then there's Green Horizon Maintenance, supposedly paid $8,000 for community landscaping. Filed as dissolved in state records 4 years ago. Greg leaned toward Rebecca, whispering something behind his hand. Paula stared blankly ahead. Saul continued. "We've already submitted this to the Office of the County Auditor, but that's just the beginning. We've also identified an incident involving a knowingly false police report filed by this board, naming my client as a threat to public safety. That report has triggered an investigation by the sheriff's office and, depending on what they uncover, could result in criminal charges. Rebecca finally stood. This is all highly irregular. You're not on the agenda. And this so-called evidence has not been vetted. It doesn't need to be vetted by you, Saul interrupted. It's being reviewed by the county prosecutor. The room went still. A man near the front rose from his seat. He wore a badge on his belt and introduced himself as Detective Ray Harmon from the county's white-collar crimes unit. "We've been observing tonight's meeting with interest," he said, "and I'll confirm what Mr. Levin said. The sheriff's office has opened an inquiry into the HOA's administrative conduct. This includes the financial records now under audit, the falsified police report, and a pattern of regulatory intimidation targeting specific homeowners." Rebecca's face turned pale. She reached for a water bottle with trembling fingers but barely managed to twist the cap. A woman down the aisle stood, holding a tablet. "I work for the county clerk," she said, "and I pulled the vendor filings myself. They're ghost companies. Someone's laundering community funds." That broke the tension. People began murmuring, then raising their voices. One man called out, "We want a full vote to dissolve the board." Another shouted, "Why don't you show us where the money went, Rebecca?" Greg stood and cleared his throat. "These accusations are unfounded, and we intend to file suit against anyone slandering the board." "Sit down," said Detective Harmon. "You'll have your chance to speak, in court." At that, Rebecca tried to leave. She grabbed her purse and started for the back exit, but two deputies were already there. They didn't stop her, not yet, but their presence said everything. The vote happened anyway, 82 votes to remove the current board. One abstained. Rebecca didn't even cast hers. The interim committee was formed on the spot: 4 volunteers and 1 former board member who'd resigned last year in protest. Their first act was to freeze all outgoing HOA funds and request a forensic audit. Back at home, I didn't celebrate. I sat on the dock and looked out over the lake, the water still and glassy under the moonlight. The boat swayed gently, moored just where it belonged. A quiet knock came at the fence gate. It was Greg. He didn't step inside. Just stood there with his hands tucked into his coat pockets, looking like someone who'd built a house of cards and finally saw the wind coming. "I didn't know about the companies," he said. "I just signed what she put in front of me." I nodded. "You gonna tell that to the prosecutor too?" He looked down. "I already did." I didn't say anything more. He turned and walked off without waiting for a reply. The following week, subpoenas were issued. Rebecca's personal accounts were flagged for suspicious activity, and her phone records were pulled. Turns out, she'd been contracting emergency maintenance through a company registered under her cousin's name. A cousin who lived 3 states away and hadn't visited in years. They found forged invoices, backdated emails, even a falsified permit application filed with the county using a stolen notary stamp. It wasn't just mismanagement anymore, it was fraud, and it was going to court. When the trial began, I got a summons to testify not just about the boat incident, but about the broader harassment campaign. So did Marlene. So did the guy who offered to mow the park. So did 4 others, including a disabled veteran who'd been fined for unsightly yard furniture when he left his mobility scooter under the carport. The courtroom wasn't packed, but the press was there. Local papers, a regional news outlet, even a podcast that covered HOA abuse stories. The state's attorney laid it out clean. Over $60,000 misappropriated, multiple fabricated complaints filed with county departments, and a pattern of retaliatory enforcement targeting anyone who questioned the board. Rebecca never looked at me during testimony. But when the verdict came in guilty on 3 counts of fraud, 2 counts of filing false reports, and a civil judgment for restitution, she dropped her head into her hands and didn't lift it again. The HOA dissolved shortly after. The new committee worked with the county to restructure it into a voluntary neighborhood association with zero enforcement power and no authority over private property. The bylaws were rewritten from scratch this time with homeowner oversight, open budget access, and a clause requiring annual audits by an independent firm. The dock stayed. The boat stayed. And so did I. Only now, when I walked the Lakeside Trail, people nodded. They waved. Not out of obligation, but respect. The kind that comes from standing your ground when someone tries to take it from you. And that bright pink violation notice, I had it framed. Hung it right above the tool bench in the garage. A reminder that some rules are worth breaking, especially when they were never legal to begin with. 2 months after the trial, the lake was calm. You could hear the soft rustle of cattails and the distant clink of someone casting a line from the far bank. The HOA was gone, and in its place, the Lakeside Neighborhood Association had formed a voluntary coalition with no enforcement authority, no fines, and no power to interpret laws. Just a rotating group of residents who wanted the community to work like it should. No nonsense, no surveillance patrols, no one measuring the angle of your porch lights. I hadn't planned on joining anything. But one of the new committee members, a retired judge named Clara, asked if I'd sit in on a meeting just to give input on property rights language. I agreed, mostly because I respected her, and because she didn't ask like she expected a yes, just offered the seat if I wanted it. At that meeting, something unexpected happened. Clara brought in a man from the state attorney general's office. His name was Marcus, and he wore a dark, unassuming suit with a silver tie clip shaped like a balance scale. He walked in with a small leather folder and a quiet intensity that made people sit up straighter. He stood at the front of the room and spoke plainly. "We've been conducting a broader investigation," he said. "The case against your former HOA board was not isolated. We've identified patterns in several communities across the county, similar misuse of funds, retaliatory enforcement, and false filings with municipal departments." Nobody interrupted. Even the usual side chatterers were still. Marcus continued. "What makes this case unique is the level of documentation. The certified plat maps, the subpoenaed financial records, the testimonies, those were critical. Most communities don't have someone willing to dig that deep." Clara turned slightly in her chair and looked at me, but didn't say a word. Marcus noticed. "We're opening a racketeering case," he said. "Based on connections between former board members and a network of shell companies operating across 3 counties. The cousin who owned one of those fake vendors, he's already flipped." That caught my attention. "Flipped how?" I asked. Marcus looked over at me. "He's cooperating. Gave us bank records, communication logs, even a spreadsheet that mapped out which communities were marked for these fraudulent maintenance contracts. Yours was one of the early ones. They used it to test how much they could get away with." The room stayed silent, but the air shifted. "Was Rebecca involved in more than just our HOA?" asked Clara. Marcus nodded. "Directly. She acted as a coordinator between boards, helped draft the language that made these fake expenses look legitimate, even advised other presidents on how to structure notices and violations to create pressure. We're pursuing conspiracy to defraud and wire fraud charges at the federal level." I leaned forward. "So she's not done facing charges?" "Not even close," Marcus said. "The first trial was just the start. She's now part of a multi-jurisdictional case. And based on what we're uncovering, she's looking at serious time." Someone in the back exhaled sharply. One of the newer residents, a young mother who'd moved in just before everything unraveled. "What can we do to help?" she asked. "Keep records," Marcus replied. "If anyone contacts you claiming to be from a compliance board, get their name, company, and call the county. These people use fake credentials. And if you see something that doesn't sit right, report it. You've already done more than most communities ever manage." After the meeting, Clara caught up with me in the parking lot. "You realize," she said, "if you hadn't challenged that dock notice, none of this would have come out." I shrugged. It wasn't about making a point. I just didn't like being lied to. She smiled, not a performative one, but the kind that made you feel like you'd just passed some quiet test. You should consider serving on the advisory committee, she said. We're drafting new guidelines for property rights education. People trust you. I'm not a politician. Good, Clara said. We've seen what happens when the wrong people get comfortable with power. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. A few days later, I got a call from Saul. He'd just come back from a legal forum where the Lakeside case was used as a teaching example. You're a legend now, he said. They're calling it the Doc Doctrine. I laughed. That sounds like a bad thriller novel. Not wrong, he replied. But listen, I got a request from a homeowners' rights group. They want you to speak at a panel. Just 5 minutes. No pressure. I agreed, mostly because I wanted to see who else had been through the ringer. The event was held at a small civic center, and the stories I heard made mine look tame. One man had been fined for installing solar panels. A woman had been charged for drying laundry on a line behind her fence. Another couple had been forced to remove a ramp for their wheelchair-bound son because it violated design uniformity. When I told my story, I kept it simple. I didn't win because I was brave, I said. I just didn't back down, and I documented everything. That line stuck. People approached after, asking how to pull plat maps, how to file open records requests, how to challenge violations without being labeled a troublemaker. I gave what advice I could and told them what Saul told me. Start with the facts. Feelings won't win a legal fight, but a certified map might. Back home, things settled. The lake stayed quiet. The dock remained mine, unbothered, and the boat got a fresh coat of paint just because I finally had the time. The neighborhood felt different, like a fog had lifted. People talked more. Kids biked without being scolded for excessive noise. Someone even painted a mural on the park wall, a blue heron rising over the water, wings outstretched. One afternoon, as I was replacing the weather stripping on the shed, a car pulled up out front. A black sedan with tinted windows. Not the police, not a neighbor. The man who stepped out wore a plain gray suit and carried a briefcase. "Mr. Jackson?" he asked. I stood, wiping my hands on a rag. "That's me. I'm with the Office of the Inspector General. We've completed the audit on the broader HOA fraud case. I'm here to deliver an official notice. You're entitled to a restitution award for your role in exposing the scheme." I blinked. "A what?" He opened the case and handed me a letter. It wasn't flashy. Government font, seal in the corner, formal language. But it stated clearly, based on my documentation and testimony, I was being issued a whistleblower compensation under state fraud statutes. Not just for the HOA outcome, but for triggering the investigation that uncovered statewide abuses. The amount was more than symbolic. I signed the necessary forms, thanked him, and watched the car disappear down the road. That evening, I sat on the dock with a cold drink, legs dangling over the edge. The sun dipped low, turning the lake copper and gold. A few ducks floated by, unconcerned with ordinances or boundary lines. Across the water, someone was grilling. The sound of laughter carried over. Someone played a guitar, poorly but with heart. I leaned back, let the wood planks warm my shoulders, and closed my eyes. No more laminated warnings. No more walkie-talkies. No more wielded authority pretending to be law. Just land, just water, just peace, and a boat tied to the dock right where it belonged.